This is Camp Countdown, the Toronto Maple Leafs podcast series. I'm your host, Kyle Cushman, and we have one of the biggest shows in store for you. It's Easton Cowan Day here on Camp Countdown. Of course, Easton Cowan is coming off of one of the best seasons we've seen from a Maple Leafs prospect in quite a few years. We're talking about an OHL MVP, playoff MVP season for a guy that went all the way to the Memorial Cup final and featured for Team Canada at the World Junior Hockey Championship. And none of that was expected coming into the season. He was drafted 28th overall in the 2023 draft out of the London Knights, and at the time, the reaction was kind of mixed, if not disappointed. Cowan wasn't a projected first-round pick. Hell, he was barely a projected second-round pick on a lot of lists and public rankings. But for Cowan, there was a lot about his game that ticked the boxes that the Maple Leafs like in a player. Fast, competitive, finished the season well, kind of all of those factors. But the concern was maybe a perceived lack of upside. Sure, Cowan has the profile and the attributes to potentially be a fun bottom six player, energy water bug type. But do you really want that kind of bottom six projection when you're drafting in the first round and also only have 3 picks total in the draft? And so for myself and for a lot of people, that was the concern at the time. Yes, we like Cowan as a prospect. Yes, we think he could be an NHL player in a certain role, but with a lack of draft capital, not trading down and reaching for a player in the first round, at least that's what we thought at the time, there was some concern over the draft pick. And that's why myself, and I'll eat this one gladly, I gave the Maple Leafs a D grade for their draft haul in 2023. You look at the 3 picks, and it was a perceived reach on Easton Cowan in the first round, not trading down and getting more ammo, which we saw them do actually this year to get more ammo and still take the guy that they like, and take 2 kind of project players as well at the time in Hudson Malinowski and Noah Chadwick. And obviously those 2 are starting to look pretty good as well, especially Chadwick. And we'll get to those 2 a little bit later on in this series. The main reason I gave the Maple Leafs a D grade at the time was the fact that Easton Cowan was expected to be available later into the second round. The Leafs didn't trade down to add more draft capital, to add to a lack of draft capital overall, which again, in the draft you need as much ammo as you can get, and the Maple Leafs didn't really have any ammo, and then took a reach in the first round. I liked the player at the time as like a bottom 6 kind of player. And what we've seen from Easton Cowan since then is him just completely take his game to the next level. And that's what the Maple Leafs saw the potential in him to do at the end of the season. That's what a lot of people missed at the end of the season. And now it's completely changed the perception of Cowan as a prospect, both currently in terms of what he can do right now, but also his upside going forwards. For Easton Cowan, I don't think there's enough that you can really say about how good his season was. Like, it started from right at rookie camp, essentially. Development camp, he had some flashes. He looked really, really good. But what really stuck out to me and made me start going, oh, the Leafs might have a player here, was at the rookie tournament in September at Traverse City, where for the first time, Easton Cowan was playing not competitive games because it's a rookie tournament, but essentially live action competitive games where people are actually trying. And Cowan was by far the best player on the Leafs roster and by far the best player in basically every game that he played in at that event. He played all 3 forward positions. He played some center, which he'd never really done with the Knights the previous season. He played on the wings as well with some of the top guys like Fraser Minton and Max Ellis and some of the more experienced players on that roster. And he was the best player. He took over some of those games. He was phenomenal. And that's when people started going, myself especially included, oh, the Maple Leafs might have a guy here. Like, he didn't look like that bottom 6 projection kind of water bug type complimentary piece that fans love at the bottom of a lineup, but doesn't really help you higher in the lineup like you would hope for in a first round pick. That looked like it was starting to change right at the rookie tournament there, and that led right into Maple Leafs training camp. He stuck around all the way through training camp because of his performance. He easily could have been sent back to the London Knights before that. And that's what the Leafs have typically done, is send back all their junior players at the same time so that they can start the season in junior and have that full season instead of being interrupted and joining a week or two later because of NHL training camp. That didn't happen for Cowan, and he looked fantastic in those games. He stood out. He scored a goal. He looked like he could hang as an 18-year-old coming off of a summer where people were criticizing the draft pick because of a lack of perceived upside. And of course, he can't actually hang at the NHL level at 18 years old, so he goes back to London and simply puts up a phenomenal first half. He was one of, if not the best player in the OHL in that opening part of the season, taking over games, being a complete and total menace on the penalty kill, putting up shorthanded points as if it was power play minutes, and that all led to him being named to the Canadian World Junior team in December. And that's something nobody saw coming in the summer. That is a big step to take for an 18-year-old player to make that roster. And as we'll get to in our conversation coming up in a few minutes, that wasn't even his best performance at training camp with Team Canada there. He had made that team because of his performance with the London Knights leading into that training camp, which is extremely impressive for an 18-year-old. And then when he went back to London, all he did was put up basically a record point streak, put up numbers over that streak comparable to Sidney Crosby, Connor Bedard, Logan Stankoven, like insane stuff over the rest of the season. Wins OHL MVP, goes into the playoffs, has an insane final against Oshawa, putting up a ton of points, wins playoff MVP, and then that brings us to the Memorial Cup, where two big games, obviously. The round robin game against Saginaw to determine who was going straight to the final, and then the final itself. In that round robin game, Easton Cowan scores the game-winning goal with under 2 minutes left to send the Knights to the Mem Cup final. And then in the Memorial Cup final, the Knights were not good through the first period and a half, 2 periods of that game. They had 1 or 2 shots throughout much of the early part of that game. And the reason that they got dragged back into that game was because of Easton Cowan. He scores to drag the team back into the fight. Ultimately, the Knights fall short. And that is what has fueled Easton Cowan through the rest of the offseason. You have that bitter ending to what was almost a perfect season. You have that fuel for the offseason, and we'll see if he can make the Maple Leafs roster coming into camp. One of the big things that changed for me with Easton Cowan is the confidence that he's played with. And I think it's important to note that he had the confidence beforehand. I want to make that abundantly clear. But there's a difference in having confidence in yourself in I can do this, and confidence in yourself where you've shown you can do this and you've already proven yourself and that you have the confidence in your ability. I think those are two different things, where confidence in believing yourself and confidence in you've already proven something are two different things and kind of two different ways to fuel yourself. Last summer, Easton Cowan felt like a confident player in terms of proving people wrong and believing in his ability. This past summer, he felt like a confident player in terms of he just proved everybody wrong. He's shown that he's good enough to at least be the best player in the OHL, if not make the NHL roster as a 19-year-old. And I think those are two key different things, and I'm excited to see what that means for Easton Cowan coming into this new season, because he's a different player than he was last year. Yes, he impressed in training camp and rookie tournament and things like that last year, but he's a different player right now coming into this next training camp. And what that means for him for making the NHL roster is going to be fascinating. I think at the very least, the Leafs have to give him at least a start in the NHL, see what he can do, get him minutes with the top players in the preseason, get him top minutes in a bunch of different roles, both on the wings, trying him on the right and the left, see what works best for him, because he's played all 3 forward positions throughout the past year. So I do believe that he should make the NHL roster out of camp, of course, if he has a good camp. If he doesn't look good or struggles or has an injury or whatever it is, ultimately the easy choice is going to be sending him back to London, where there are still things for him to work on and improve on and things for him to succeed at. But I think ultimately the challenge of getting actual NHL games at the beginning of the season is going to be vital for his development at this stage, because he can't play AHL games right now. He's not eligible. It sucks that he can't go straight to the Marlies, but he can. Starting in the NHL, I think is going to be the best thing for his development, because he gets a taste of that and either he hangs and becomes an important cheap piece for the Maple Leafs, or he gets that experience and knows what it takes to get back to that level throughout the rest of the season and then after next offseason. The prevailing thought for myself and a lot of people that watch the Leafs is that Easton Cowan is deserving of this opportunity in training camp, and I know a lot of people are very excited to see what he can do with it. Ultimately, I do think he'll end up back with the London Knights, either after 9 games, after 25 games, whatever it is. I think Easton Cowan will end up back at junior either after that 9-game trial or going into December for the World Juniors. And at the World Juniors for Team Canada, unless he's, again, blown away expectations, which is Easton Cowan. He's shown an ability to do that. I think he can do that again. But I expect him to play at the World Juniors, be a top player for Team Canada at that event nearby in Ottawa. It's going to be a great event. He's going to get that local flair. He's going to have the huge crowds and kind of the environment that he thrives in. And then we'll see what he can do at Team Canada as the top player or one of the top players on that roster, and then go into the rest of the season looking to go back-to-back as OHL champs with the London Knights, and then get his revenge in the Memorial Cup final. So for Easton Cowan, the pick that they acquired to select him with was in the Rasmus Sandin trade. The Leafs traded Sandin to the Capitals. They got Eric Gustafsson back and a first-round pick that they used on Easton Cowan. At the time, after the pick, a lot of people were down on that trade. I think a lot of people are high on that trade over a year later. So let's dive more into Easton Cowan's game and get to my conversation now with Scott Wheeler from The Athletic to talk everything about Easton Cowan's game and what he could do this upcoming season. Very excited to welcome on The Athletic Scott Wheeler to chat all about Easton Cowan. Scott, thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think it's best to kind of look over what the past year has been as a whole for Easton first before diving into kind of what next year looks like for him. Obviously, surprise first round pick. Everyone has seen the clip of him coming all the way down the stairs and has seen the public rankings and the way that things were on draft day and kind of how things have gone over the past year. But looking back at your 23 rankings, something that stood out to me in the blurb that you wrote was the last sentence. He's a heart and soul guy who I'm confident will take his career as far as it can go. Over the past year, how have you kind of seen his game progress and kind of take it as far as it can go in the past year?
Yeah, I mean, it was a perfect year. Like that's not me overstating it. It literally went as well as it could have possibly gone for Easton Cowan. He was excellent in Traverse City. He was good, or maybe even a little bit better than expected in his first main training camp. Him and Fraser Minton both stuck around, I think, longer than the Leafs expected that they would. He got off to an excellent start in London. He made, as an 18-year-old, the Canadian World Junior team. He was the OHL MVP. It was sort of exactly what you'd hope for out of a first-round pick. And now suddenly he looks exactly like a first-round pick is supposed to look, right? So I think there were signs even late last year, though. That line of his with Ryan Winterton and Denver Barkey in the OHL playoffs right before the draft was outstanding. Like they were the best line in that OHL playoff run for any team. They carried the load, and you could just see him in Denver. Everybody knew Ryan Winterton was a top player at that level already, but him and Denver were really, really coming. And both of those guys have just continued to build on that. They were two of the best penalty killers in the OHL this year, obviously OHL champions, nearly Memorial Cup champions. Other than not winning the Memorial Cup, that's really all he could have hoped for. So now he gets to go back next year. I think the London Knights, I expect he'll be given every opportunity to play a little bit in the NHL, and we can get to that to start the year. But I think he's more than likely going to, at least after playing a little bit in the NHL, go back. He'll be an even bigger part of the World Junior team. And the London Knights, despite having just gone to the Memorial Cup and won an OHL title, typically when that happens, you're in full rebuild mode the next year. But because Barkey was 18, because Cowan was 18, because Haltonen was 18, because Bonk was 18, because Dickinson was 17, their nucleus outside of really losing Michael Simpson, their starting goaltender, and a couple of overagers, their nucleus is the same. So they've got a real chance to go back to back, which almost never happens in junior hockey. And then from there, I think he's a full-time NHLer. If he doesn't stick with the team this year, you're definitely looking at penciling him into a top 12, if not a top 9 role the following year.
Yeah, looking back to last summer, I think the consensus overall was that there was a lot to like about Cowan's game, but it kind of projected into that bottom 6 type role. And that's maybe the knock against him being a first round at the time was maybe a lack of upside in terms of like a top 6 piece compared to some of the other guys that were projected to go in that range. How have you kind of seen Cowan improve over the past year to kind of improve that potential as well?
Yeah, no, I think he's definitely upgraded his outlook from potential energy, water bug, third line guy, great skater, gets after it, to maybe there's second line offense there. Maybe he's a top 6 guy. Maybe he's the third best player on a first line. Like, I don't think we're going to be talking about Easton Cowan as a star in the NHL, but I think he's going to be an impact guy who has enough offense that he's a regular contributor inside a top 9, whether that's as top dog on a third line, second fiddle on a second line, third fiddle on a first line. Like, I think that's kind of what you're looking at now for Easton Cowan. And that's a darn good player. Like, those types of players make $5 million in the NHL and are important parts of winning teams, right? So now suddenly, is he a power play guy suddenly? I think the answer is probably yes. Can he penalty kill? Also, yes. Does he still have the skating and the energy and the work ethic? Yes. The big thing for him this year, you talk to anybody. I spoke to all sorts of people in London about him. I spoke with Rob Simpson multiple times over the course. Rob Simpson's the AGM there. I spoke with Rob multiple times over the course of the season about him. The one thing they were trying to teach him was just sort of his decision making on the puck. He was so good at that level and getting so many touches on the puck at that level that oftentimes it was a little scattered. And by that, I mean, he was just out there constantly trying to make things happen. He was turning over a lot of pucks. Just making better decisions with the touches that he got was really important for them, because they know that he's not going to have the puck all the time in the NHL like he did at that level this year, because of his skating and his ability to lift pucks off of guys. Like, he would just go get it and he would get it, right? So that's going to change. And I don't think he is the smartest hockey player offensively. Like, he's not a cerebral, like, finesse guy. He just kind of plays on instinct. But I do think that came a long way. Like, he started to make better decisions with the puck. He does have natural playmaking. He can shoot it. Like, there is real offense there. But he also just has to work for everything that he gets. And I think as a result, he's going to be a player that Leafs fans, and I mean, Leafs fans have a history of liking guys like that, right? Like, guys who just work hard. I think part of the reason that, despite Max Domi's flaws as a defensive player, part of the reason people liked Max Domi, and even Nick Robertson, he's got some flaws as a defensive player, but part of the reason people are rooting for him is just because he works. You can tell he's working his tail off. Darcy Tucker, Zach Hyman, you go down the list. I think that's what Easton's going to become for the fan base. He's going to be a player that everybody likes. He's not going to be a polarizing player in the way that a Mitch Marner or a William Nylander are, right? Like, he's even Morgan Riley and some of his habits. Like, Easton's just going to be a player that everybody likes watching, which is never a bad thing either.
Yeah, looking obviously the incredible season that he had, at what point in the season did that switch kind of flip for you, where it went from, okay, this is a guy that bottom 6, reached in the first round, but has some things that we like here, to he's putting together like a legitimately fantastic season, and he can do a lot of impressive things, whether that be the MVP, making World Juniors, things like that. When did that switch start to flip for yourself and kind of your evaluation of Cowan over the season?
Well, him and Barkey scored all those shorthanded goals, right, if you remember, right in the fall at the start of last season. And they started to catch highlights on the penalty kill. And then you thought, okay, there's something there. He had a really good October. Then he had a really good November. Then he had a really good December. But it was really at Canada's camp where it started to click for me. He was actually bad at Canada's camp. And anytime an 18-year-old is bad, not bad, but he wasn't at his best at Canada's camp in Oakville in advance of the World Juniors. And anytime that happens, you typically start to hear the coaching staff sort of talk about them in hints that they're not going to be on the team. And when it happened with him, all you kept hearing from the Canadian coaching staff in Oakville during selection camp was, we know he's more than what he's shown here. We know. So they had, like, it felt like even though he was an 18-year-old, they had actually made up their minds before selection camp that he was going to be on the team, which is extremely rare, right? Like, unless you're a Connor Bedard or that type, typically those 18-year-old kids have to prove it over a 19-year-old in camp. And it felt like the reverse. The 19-year-olds who were playing better than him, including Denver Barkey, who was Denver's an 18-year-old, but Denver was better than Easton Cowan in that camp by a lot. And Denver was obviously one of the last cuts, and Cowan made the team. And I think he was so good in November, early December, that they had decided, this kid's on the team. And even though he didn't play his best in that camp, they still put him on the team. And he wasn't, frankly, his low point of the season was probably also the World Juniors. He wasn't great in the World Juniors itself, the tournament itself. Now, there were a ton of Canadian forwards who struggled, including Matt Savoy, Jordan Dumais, you go down the list. But the fact that it wasn't a perfect tournament for him and he was still being trusted to go out there and be an important part of that team, even played in the top 6 for that team as an 18-year-old, I think that spoke to me of, okay, he's obviously had a great start to the season here, but people in hockey are starting to look at this kid a little bit differently.
Yeah, and playing at the World Juniors, I believe that's the first time he got to play for Team Canada as well. You talked about a little bit of that being kind of the down point of his season, but what were your impressions getting to see him on kind of the international scale for the first time?
Well, I think the thing with Easton is, even when he's having a bad game, the speed and the work ethic and the work rate is always there. So he's never costing you. He's not a liability out there. Even when the offense isn't there, he can still contribute on a shift. And that's really what the World Juniors were about for him. Like, let's be honest, it was an extremely disappointing Canadian team. Anytime they lose in the quarterfinals, it's a disappointment. And he couldn't help them elevate. But in saying that, he was still a contributor on that team as an 18-year-old, and it got you thinking, okay, if they think this kid's a top 6 player on this team, and he bounced out of the top 6 a little bit briefly, but he was mostly a top 6 player in that tournament. And if they think he's that, then what's he going to be next year as a 19-year-old, right? So now you look at the roster, and he's going to be one of their top wingers. He's going to be one of their 2 or 3 go-to wingers. He's going to be a big part of everything that they do, offensively at 5-on-5, special teams, late in games, I imagine. He's going to be an important piece for that team. And this year's Team Canada, we just put together our roster projections today. They actually come out tomorrow morning. We left some huge names off of this year's Team Canada. So it's going to be a hard team to make, and it's going to be a much better team. I think they're the favorites for gold, especially after Will Smith turned pro for USA. I do think that American team, if Will Smith is back from San Jose, which I had a source tell me just 24 hours ago that's actually a real possibility that Smith plays for the World Junior team. If Smith plays for the US, I think they've got a chance to repeat for gold. If he's not there, I think the Canadians are pretty clearly the stronger team, especially up front. But I mean, Trey Augustine might be the best goaltender in the tournament and is back for a 3rd time for the Americans. So who knows? But no, he's going to have a big role on next year's team. And I thought he was fine. He wasn't bad in last year's tournament, but I thought he was sort of just okay.
Yeah, this upcoming World Juniors, if it's going to be good no matter what, obviously, in that Canada USA head-to-head, if we do get that. But that Will Smith dimension just adds a completely different complexion to the tournament. And I hope we do get to see it, because both teams basically being a full force with obviously 1 or 2 exceptions is always the best that we get. But looking kind of where Easton Cowan ranks across the NHL now as a prospect, obviously being a surprise first rounder last year, and now being pretty much a consensus top 50 prospect across the league now. You recently put out your top 100 list, and kind of working through that and kind of looking at the players drafted in 2023, adding in the guys that have kind of graduated from prospect status as well, basically in that 14-15 range in terms of rank among those 23 prospects. Do you think that's a fair assessment of where he currently ranks if you were to rank things for the 23 draft class right now, and if you were to do a redraft?
Yeah, I think mid to late teens is where he'd be. I'm not sure whether he's 14, 15, but I think more or less shortly, like if he's not there, he's 16, 17, 18, 19 kind of thing, which given where they drafted him and given how he was viewed pre-draft, is a huge rise. Like you still look back at that group in that range, and I think a lot of those guys still belong there. It was actually despite the pandemic and the role that it played in that age group and all of that. You look back at that draft order, and I actually think it played out pretty well. I don't think a lot of teams sort of made boneheaded mistakes like a Tyler Boucher going 10th to Ottawa prior to that, right? So no, but he's firmly in that top 20 in that group, which means he's a legit high end prospect.
Yeah, and talking about that high end prospect, the accolades last year are just incredible to look back at. The most outstanding player in the OHL, playoff MVP, one of I think 6 players ever to do that in the same season, and one of 3 players to do that in their draft plus 1 season or younger. The 42 game point streak, if you include the playoff games as well. If you look at those 3 accolades, the most outstanding player in the regular season, playoff MVP, and the point streak, which of those 3 accolades is the most impressive to you?
The point streak, because that's who Cowan is as a like it signifies who he is as a player, which is that consistency, the game to game that I talked about it, the no bad shifts, even when the offense isn't there, he finds ways to contribute. That is who Easton Cowan is as a player. That's who he's going to have to be at the next level. I don't think he's ever going to be a super streaky guy who rides the highs and the lows. He just goes out and he brings it night after night after night, shift after shift. He comes in waves. They call him Cowboy, obviously, but it's fitting. It's fitting when they talk about him. And when even at the Memorial Cup, when I asked the coaching staff about him and his teammates about him, all they talked about was second and third efforts and hounding pucks and hunting pucks. He actually made one of the biggest plays of the Memorial Cup was for a forced turnover that Easton created that set up a goal, right? Like I believe it was to Sam Dickinson cross ice, and he just has this way of having moments like that over the course of a game where he tends to spend his shifts in the offensive zone, and when he's not in the offensive zone, he's on pucks, he's tracking. All of that is there, so he's got a really, really strong foundation to work with that way.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned some of those big plays he made late in the season, and it feels like he rises to the occasion in those big moments so much, especially with the London Knights over the past couple of years. We talk about one of the reasons he became a first round pick is his play in the playoffs in his draft year, and last year being this past season, I should say, being the OHL MVP in the playoffs, but especially in the Memorial Cup, some big moments. He was one of the guys that really drove London back in that final game to at least make that a competition before obviously the crazy goal at the end. But then before that as well, I believe he had the game winner against Saginaw in the round robin as well.
Yeah, the 2 best games of that tournament were Saginaw and London, and he almost brought them back in one, and he single-handedly won them the other in the round robin to punch their ticket automatically to the final, right? So yeah, those were huge moments for him. I thought those were the 2 best teams in the CHL all year long. Obviously, Saginaw, unfortunate they didn't even get to play in the OHL final because they had to play in the Western Conference final first. But Saginaw was the only team that took a win off of London in the OHL playoffs, and they actually took 2. It was a 6-game series. I think had Zane Parekh been healthy for the entirety of that series, that it's probably a 7-game series. I believe they were actually, I think on the season series, they played each other like 16 times or whatever, and London won 3 or 4 more than Saginaw, but in games where Zane Parekh was on the ice, they played to exactly with the final. They played to exactly 500. So those were the 2 best teams in the country for me, and he rose in both of those games.
Yeah, and now diving a bit more into the player himself right now, one of the key things is obviously the versatility that we've talked about, where he kind of plays all situations, offensively, defensively, but also across the board at all 3 forward positions. He played a lot of left wing, a lot of right wing as well, even mixed in at center, both at development camp last year with the Maple Leafs and then the rookie tournament, and then with the Knights as well. Where do you see kind of his positional versatility right now, how that can be a factor for him at the next level? And do you think that it's a possibility we could see him down the middle at the professional level?
I think he's a winger. I still think he's a winger, just with the speed element, his ability to get after it along the wall and go hunt pucks, and that sort of second layer, the second quick, if you will. I think he'll be a winger, but the beauty is he can play, but he is very comfortable playing both wings, which was noticeable even in Plymouth over the last week. He played exclusively. They did not in a single practice or a single game have him slotted at the left wing, and he's obviously a natural lefty. They had him playing exclusively at the right. In the tournament in Sweden, he played exclusively on the left. So his comfort level on both wings, I think, is important. Typically, you only see the big time shooters play their off wing comfortably, and he's not a big time shoot. Like, he doesn't have that one timer that they try to free up on the off wing. He just, because he works hard and he gets after it, and he can kind of just play wherever you need him. I still don't think he's going to be a center at the NHL level, but the versatility on the wing is real. Like, he is actually quite comfortable playing the right side.
Yeah, and with that versatility, did mention the shorthanded prowess, and the penalty killing is one of the things that really stood out, as you mentioned, early in the season, but over the season as a whole, it felt like the London Knights were as dangerous shorthanded as they were on the power play at times. What makes Cowan such an impressive penalty killer in your mind?
Well, part of it's just the intensity and him always being ramped up. Part of it is the skating piece and just being able to jump in on holes. But the big thing is he's just got the smarts and instincts for it. Certainly the skating helps because it allows him to push down ice, create partial breaks for himself, create one-on-ones with D. He doesn't have to chip and chase it because he can use his feet to escape pressure in his own zone and push the puck down ice in control. All of that are sort of the actual skills of on the PK that benefit him. But if you actually watch him play on the PK, what has always impressed me is just his instincts. He knows when to hide himself and how to sort of jump into gaps in coverage and intercept passes. Certainly he'll get after it whenever there's a bobble. He's going to jump on you. He's going to force your hand. If you mishandle the puck along the boards, he's going to win that battle and he's going to take it up ice. But it's the instincts. That's what created all the offense. The number of cross seam passes that he intercepted and went the other way with last year, that's what impressed me. So, and then him and Barkey were just feeding off of each other because Barkey also has those instincts and Barkey is also a good skater. I think Easton's a better skater than Denver, but both great skaters can both just really capitalize on those opportunities. And then they have the smarts and the instincts to go down ice and not make a mistake, but like really challenge D without being too cute with it. So he's kind of exactly what you hope for out of a penalty killer.
We've talked a lot of
his defensive habits. I don't actually think his defensive habits at 5-on-5 are all that much of a strength. It's just when he can see that there's offense to be created, he's got great instincts.
Yeah, the instinct is something that really jumps out. Obviously, it's so much. The way that he creates both offensively and defensively, penalty kill, all those things. So much of it comes from jumping on opportunity, creating things himself, and less about kind of the intelligence of the game. Like you've mentioned, it's very much an instinctual player, and kind of the speed and pace that he plays with is such a big factor of that. Do you think that's something that will take some time to transition in the NHL, or is that something that you think could be a strength right away?
There's definitely going to be some teaching with him at the NHL in terms of some of that stuff I talked about that London has tried to teach in terms of the decision making on the puck, but also off the puck. Like, he can pull himself, he can get caught out of position. He knew in the OHL that if he chased guys and he just hunted and tracked, that even if he was pulling himself out of position, that because of his skating, that he could be disruptive, that he could come up with steals, that he could knock pucks loose. He knew all of that. And so he played that style because it worked. In the NHL, he's going to have to play to structure a little bit more, and he's going to have to learn to play within structure a little bit more because all NHL players have to. But the instincts are still going to be there, and they're still going to take over when they need to. So I hope they don't actually coach it out of him. Sometimes you can see that, right? Where guys, especially young players, are told, you have to do this, you have to play this role, you're this guy on the line, don't pull yourself offline. Play to your line mates. That's never really been Easton's strength. He wants to be F1 all the time, right? He's not concerned with being F3 necessarily. So now maybe he can be that in the NHL, where guys know that they have to play the high guy in the offensive zone so that he can get after it and be the first guy in. But he's also going to have to learn to not always chase, right?
Yeah. We've talked a lot about the strengths of Cowan's game. I think it's important to note, obviously, coming into a season or a training camp where people expect him to at least start the season in the NHL and maybe get a game or two at the very least.
Yep.
What are the areas that he needs to work on most right now? What do you think are the important key areas for Cowan to improve upon at this stage to kind of get to the NHL level?
I think it's just going to be sort of what we've talked about: the game management, the defensive habits. That's his next step. I would like to see his shot find another sort of little bit more oomph to it. He obviously scored a ton in the OHL this year, but he's not a natural goal scorer per se. Like he can't not make maybe can't's not the right word, but he doesn't often score from sort of mid distance or from range. He did on the power play a little bit, but even on that power play in London, Kasper Halttunen was more
Yeah.
the trigger man, and Kasper Halttunen's got one of the best shots outside the NHL, so for good reason. But I would like to see maybe some of the playmaking, some of the using his line mates a little bit better. He likes to stick handle and have the puck on his stick and make things happen. I think again that's instincts more than this. He doesn't really have that cerebral quality, and as a result, he plays in give and goes really well with his teammates, but he's maybe not always identifying the guy who's cross ice. So that part of his game, there are little things like that. He just needs to. I would say the playmaking could use a little bit more. The shot could use a little bit more. And then some of the sort of habits are going to need to come with coaching. But that's not uncommon for an 18-year-old kid either.
Yeah, there's an interesting blend here in Cowan where, like you mentioned, he likes the puck on his stick. He likes to weave around, find certain things in the offensive zone there. But he also has kind of the traits to be that kind of F1
Chip and
checkers,
chase.
speed, pace, kind of things like
Yeah.
that. Do you think he can be a play driver in a notable kind of lineup spot in the NHL, or do you see him more being that complementary piece who can help out kind of some higher end talent?
No, I think he can be a play driver. I think maybe if you'd asked me that question a year ago, I would have said complimentary. But I think that, again, the prognostication on him has kind of changed. The projection has elevated. And I think as a result, you have to expect him and challenge him now to be a play driver. He can't just be the chip and chase go getter. He's got to show. You've got to trust him to show his skill. I actually worry that with too much coaching, he might revert back to that. That he might be told that he has to be the go getter on his line, and if he turns over pucks and that kind of a thing, is the coaching staff encouraging him to continue to try to make those plays, or are they trying to get him to lean more into his strengths? I think if he's developed properly, he's going to be encouraged to be a bit of a skill guy now. He has skill. He's got speed. He can take defenders one-on-one. Like, there is talent there. So that I think unlocks a different level in him if they trust him early in his career to make those plays. Like, you don't just want him to be like, I'm trying to use Leafs comps. They're not perfect comps, but just for listeners, like, you don't want him to be a Kasperi Kapanen or an Ilya
Mhm.
Mikheyev or that type of player. You want him to showcase his skill more than that, and to hold on to pucks more than those guys did. And now I don't think he skates like Kapanen did, for example, but he's a high end skater in his own right. And I think those types of players can be told, especially early in their career, that they need to be a certain thing. So I think they should be nurturing his skill. And we don't really know how they're going to treat it either, because we've got an entirely new coaching staff who we're just going to have to wait and see how they handle some of these young guys, Fraser Minton included. Is Tapi Niemela going to get a look at some point here? Those are conversations that are going to be had. I'm much lower on Fraser Minton than most, but Cowan in particular, like, they have to make sure he's a good player. He can't just be like, Fraser Minton's going to be a bottom six guy, and I think probably more likely a fourth line guy than a third line guy. Cowan, they need Cowan to be more than that, and so I hope they coach him that way.
Yeah, and you talk a little bit about the coaching staff and all those changes. Last year, we saw Fraser Minton get that trial, which was a lot more of a surprise, I think,
Yeah,
than kind of the perception of Cowan coming into this training camp. So a lot of people are expecting him to, at the very least, be on the day one roster. Do you think he should get that NHL trial as it currently
I do.
stands? How many games do you think he should get? And do you think he can play his way into a full-time kind of NHL spot right now?
I think if he plays well now, you want to challenge him in camp, but I think you give him every opportunity to play a lot of games in camp. If he plays well in camp, and not just opportunity to play games, like he shouldn't be playing in those dead games where
Yeah.
he's playing with AHLers. I want to see him playing with William Nylander and John
Yep.
Tavares and see what that looks like, right? Like I think it's important, even if he's not going to be that on day one, he needs to get those kinds of looks. Like he needs to play with those types of players. He should be, at the very least, be playing with Kalle Yarncroc and guys who are on the NHL roster. And then you see what you have, and I think you give him 9 games. Like unless he's horrible, unless he looks injured or banged up or not himself, or the coaching staff doesn't seem to like him, like unless it's a really bad camp, which I don't think it will be, again because of his work ethic and the skating, and he's going to find ways to have a decent camp. I think you got to give him after that 9 games, and I wouldn't even be opposed to burning a year and sort of playing him for the front half of the season, and then your next checkpoint is the World Juniors. Like it's that often is the case where guys start the
Yep.
year, they play 30 games in the NHL, and then at the World Juniors, you can maybe send them to the World Juniors and send them back to London for the second half, and I think that could be really good for him. So that's kind of what I imagine is going to play out. If he'll either play 9 games and go down, or I think he starts and he plays the full sort of front half of the season, and then the World Juniors is your next decision. And I think even if he's playing well, you should probably send him just so he can play a bigger role, be a top dog on that team. And then I don't even think going back to a full season in London might be a long time for him. But if he's going back to London for the second half and another Mem Cup push, I think that could be positive for him as well.
Yeah, I think we look at the return to junior as such a negative for so many of these players that put up MVP level seasons, huge point totals, that kind of stuff when they return for their 19-year-old season, just kind of given
Yeah.
you want to see them at the AHL level, but we can't right now. What are some of the positives, or what are the things that he could work on if he does go back to the OHL level, either to start the season or after the World Juniors, depending on how things play out?
I think he ends up in a situation where he's such a good player at that league that he can, at that level, that he can kind of work on whatever he's told to work on. Like if the Leafs tell him to shoot the puck more, he can shoot the puck more. If the Leafs tell him to pass the puck more, he can pass the puck more. There are tons of benefits to playing at that level, even when you've risen past it, even if you are the reigning MVP. I think there's still a lot of benefit to playing as the guy. You get more touches. You've got the puck on your stick more often. You're with your peers for another 6 months. You get to play in high stakes games in the playoffs. There's lots of value to that. I think people look down on going back to the OHL more than they should. I think a lot of players that people think are done with junior hockey and should be playing in the AHL under some kind of an exemption, I think would actually struggle more in the AHL than people realize. Yeah, if he plays 30 games in the NHL and then 40 games back in junior, I think that could be great for him. That's what Brant Clark did after the World Juniors.
Yep.
He started in LA. They sent him to the World Juniors. He played a big role at the World Juniors. He went back to Barrie for the second half. He was as dominant a defenseman as there's been in Barrie or in the OHL, really, as long as I've been watching the league over the last 11, 12 years. Brant Clark was like plus 50 in 40
It
games
was
and
insane.
had 70 something points in 40. I think that was good for Brant Clark because he's playing in LA and he's in and out of the lineup in the press box and he's in a tough spot, and he got to go back and have fun and dominate. And I don't think you can do too much of that unless you're Connor Bedard or Sidney Crosby or Connor McDavid. Those guys don't need to be going anywhere but the NHL. But Easton Cowan's not that. I don't think there's anything wrong with him playing some games in the OHL next year.
Yeah, and just to wrap up here and kind of put a bow on this last conversation we've had here, what percentage would you put on Easton Cowan being on Canada's roster at the World Juniors? And to follow that up, what percentage would you put on him being on the Leafs day one playoff roster?
Probably 75% for both. I think he's going to be on the Leafs day one roster, and I think he's also probably going to be at the World Juniors, even if he's in the NHL.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately probably what's best for him, where he gets the best of both worlds, where he gets that NHL taste, he gets the ability to improve his game at the NHL level. And what we've seen from him over the past 2 years is that he can handle that competition and wants that and almost strives in those opportunities where he's challenged. And then also gets the opportunity to go and show out at the World Juniors, be a top player there. And kind of build on that from there as well. So that's a very intriguing prospect, and it's been a while for the Maple Leafs since we've had a prospect with this team play for Team Canada in such a big role at the World Juniors. I think you got to go back to Mitch Marner to be the last one. And obviously there's a bunch of comparisons to Marner, given the London Ice ties, the Canada stuff, all that stuff. Obviously very different caliber of players, but going to be a very, very interesting season for Easton Cowan. Scott, thanks for jumping on today to talk about Cowan. Let us know where we can find your work and if there's anything you'd like to plug.
Yeah, at Scott C. Wheeler on Twitter, or I suppose X now, and at The Athletic for all of my work. It's I hope that people will subscribe and continue to support us. It's been quite the run. I'll be coming up on almost 9 years at The Athletic, which is crazy in this industry. So it's I think it's a special place in terms of at least certainly our hockey coverage. So I think we've got a pretty incredible team on the hockey side. So yeah, give us a shot. I don't think you'll regret it. That would be my plug.
Yeah, and I
should say, Easton Cowan might not be the only Leaf on Team Canada.
Okay, there we go. I like it.
I think Noah Chadwick has an opportunity to be a depth defenseman for that team. Obviously, Peter Anholt, his GM in Lethbridge, is the GM of Team Canada this year, so that doesn't hurt either. But Chadwick had a really nice post-draft season as well, to his credit. So shout out to him, because Mark Masters will love that. He loves when there's Leafs prospects at the World Juniors, and he hasn't had that very often over the years.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining the show, Scott. I can vouch for the Athletics work. It has been so incredible. I've been subscribed since they had Toronto and Chicago. Those are the two sports markets that I support. I've been subscribed the whole time, and I can definitely say that, especially in the prospect sphere, there's not much you can look elsewhere that is better than the work that you and Corey especially do. And also, I want to give a shout out to your Leafs book as well, which is a great read if you're into the prospect stuff and draft stuff as well, if you want to mention that as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's behind the scenes with the Toronto Maple Leafs at the NHL draft, sort of 20 stories from the draft over the years. They asked me originally to do a history of the Leafs at the draft, and I tried to avoid that. So you won't get every pick, you won't get every story, but you'll get 20 reported ones, spoke to about 50 people for it, and really, really proud of the book. So I appreciate you giving me a chance to give that a plug.
For sure. Thanks for joining the show, and enjoy the rest of the Helenka Gretzky here, and enjoy the rest of your summer as best as you can.
Yep. Cheers. Keep up the good work, Kyle.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it. That's going to do it for this edition of Leafs Camp Countdown. Thanks again to Scott for joining the show for this big one on Easton Cowan. Be sure to check out previous episodes of the show on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast content. We'll be back tomorrow for more Leafs Camp Countdown. See you then.